Chapter 3 No One Lives Forever. Satomi Masami, First Year, Class D. Part 3. Five minutes later, Masami was walking along the street, once again supporting Kusatsu Akiko. Her fainting spell ended, and her eyes opened. Where are we? Ah, good. You're awake, Masami said, stepping away from her. I was asleep? Oh no. Why didn't you wake me up? Kusatsu Akiko asked, quite flustered. I shook you several times. Oh no, I'm sorry. I wonder what... She tried to figure out the last thing she remembered, but she couldn't remember a thing. Obviously, it never occurred to her that she had died, and now was merely functioning as a puppet, thanks to the stimulus of the drug. You're pretty heavy, you know that? It was hard work carrying you, Masami said, sternly. Kusatsu Akiko turned bright red, but for some reason, she wasn't that hurt by his words. They parted ways in front of the station. See you at school tomorrow. Yeah, don't tell anyone about tonight, especially... She started to say a name, but trailed off. She felt like there was a boy who she really didn't want to see her in an embarrassing moment like this. But for the life of her, she couldn't remember his name or what he looked like. Especially, who? Masami asked, with a knowing smile. Never mind. Kusatsu Akiko's love had vanished with her memories. I had fun today, Masami said kindly. But she simply replied, Oh, as if she didn't care at all, and turned her back. She felt like there was a big, gaping hole in her heart, but she had no way of telling that her will and spirit were swiftly vanishing. Masami paused to watch Kusatsu Akiko enter into the station, then swiftly turned on his heel and walked back into the city. Yurihara was waiting at the Tristan coffee shop. She was seated in a booth towards the back. It went well? She asked. She was wearing glasses and had her hair in a sauvage style. Masami knew that Yurihara could control her hair at will, but these quick hairstyle changes always took a moment to get used to. Yeah, her emotions are already fading, Masami replied. He sat down and ordered lemon tea and maroon cake to smooth his sweet tooth. Your order is on its way. Without knowing what she's doing, she'll make all her friends try a drug that even she doesn't remember getting. Like a sleepwalker in the night, she'll regurgitate the fluid made by the cells in her body. You won't even try and figure out where it comes from. Her brain is shrinking. She can't be bothered to make decisions on her own. They looked at each other and giggled. From the side, they looked like any peaceful, harmless young couple. But Satomi had already sacrificed the lives of 3 girls to Yurihara, the monstrous man-eater known as the Manticore. They had met 2 months before, just before summer vacation. Masami was a member of the tea ceremony club, largely because it never did anything. He had heard that it was a good idea to have been a member of a club in high school when it came time to apply for universities or jobs. Yurihara Minako was a member as well. Much like Masami, she hardly ever bothered to show up for the infrequent meetings that the club tended to have. One day, it suddenly started to rain in the evening, despite blue skies all afternoon. The whims of summer. Masumi had not planned to go to the club meeting, but since he had no umbrella, he thought he might as well kill some time in the tea room. He turned around at the shoeboxes at the entrance to the school and went back inside. The tea ceremony club didn't have a room of their own. They simply borrowed a room that was usually used for student guidance, as it was the only Japanese-style room in the school. The faculty sponsor was the assistant principal, Komiya, and he was much too busy to ever show his face at meetings. That day, the room was deathly silent, and there was no sign of any other students. Next to the door was the tea ceremony club attendance book. If your name was written in this, it appeared that you had attended the meeting. Even if you rarely came, as long as your name showed up in the book, you were treated like an active member and could stay on the rosters. Masumi opened the book and was about to write the date and his name when he realized there was already an entry for that date. Someone else was here. Yurihara Minako. Even if she had gone to the bathroom, it was strange that she hadn't left her bag. Before now, Masumi had never even had the slightest interest in Yurihara Minako. She had a reputation for brains and beauty, but she never mattered to him in the slightest. And like many a man before him, he had always been baffled by the idea of beauty. He had already lost his virginity in junior high to a girl with a face covered in zits, and who was widely reputed as being rather ugly. Their relationship was kept secret, but less because he was embarrassed, and more because he didn't want to listen to everyone else's shocked commentaries on the subject. He didn't think anything at all about dating an ugly girl. In fact, after she started dating him, her pimples vanished. She actually became quite pretty. She soon left him for another boyfriend, but Masumi wasn't particularly upset. He had actually never loved her to begin with. He simply used her to relieve his sexual appetites. Instead, she ended up crying and apologizing, even though it had been her idea to break up in the first place. Masumi no longer remembered her name, and he couldn't remember Yurihara Minako's face all that clearly either. He knew she was supposed to be good-looking, and that she had good grades, but that was about it. "Senpai, you there?" he asked, taking off his slippers and stepping onto the tatami in his socks. He opened the shoji, leading into the inner room. It was less of a room than a storage area for tables and cushions. The moment he opened it, his eyebrows leapt upwards. In the storage area, Yurihara Minako was upside down against a pile of cushions, face twisted around so that it faced the same direction as her torso. Her head was on backwards. Her neck was broken with her spine clearly severed. Her eyes were open and empty. She wasn't moving. At all. She was dead. The first thought that flashed through Masumi's mind was relief that he had not written his name in the attendance book. He didn't want to get mixed up in something like this. He took a step backwards. This saved his life. A hand with razor-sharp claws passed through the air just in front of his face. Some hidden killer had attacked him. "What?" He looked up. There was a naked girl clinging to the ceiling, hands and feet thrust in the cracks between the wood paneling. He thought it was a woman, but only assumed this because he couldn't see any male genitalia between its legs. Later, he was to learn that there was no genitalia there at all. The girl grinned. "You saw me," she whispered. "Now that you have seen me, I cannot allow you to live." She continued as if she were sharing a joke. If there had not already been a corpse lying beneath her, he would have not taken her seriously. Masumi was stunned. He simply stared blankly up at her, immobile. If he had been a girl, he would have heard the legends. He would have thought, "It's Boogiepop!" She moved like the wind. He kicked Masumi in the chest, sending him flying into the opposite wall before he knew what happened. "Gah!" he yelled as his back slammed into the wall. He moaned in pain. "Ugh!" and was about to pass out, but he knew deep down that he couldn't let himself succumb to his body's frailties. She laughed softly as she approached. There were traces of mud and leaves on her body. The mountains behind the school ran deep. She had probably ventured through them and came out at the school. She looked like a majestic wild animal with a strange beauty about her, a strange fearlessness that he had never seen anywhere else, and an established aloofness found only in things that were beyond human understanding. Masumi simply stared up at her. "Nice timing. I had just thought that it would be better to copy a male than a female. I shall take your shape," she said, reaching out towards Masumi. As if freed from possession, he blinked and said, What? He frowned. Copy? Yes. I shall become you and blend into human society. No one will ever be able to find me. Huh. His face scrunched up, but not because he felt despair at the sight of his approaching demise. No. The next thing he said was, "In that case, it would be far more effective to keep me alive." He sounded a little put out by this. The girl frowned. Why? "Oh, you'll just have a much easier time as a stuck-up teacher's pet with no friends at all, like our little Yurihara Minako here. If you try and take my place, people will notice the difference. I've strived to maintain at least a mid-level of popularity here. People know me." He sounded deeply disappointed by this. That's because he was. He wanted to be killed by something much more powerful than him. Even with Kirimanagi, he had not really wanted to date her. He had wanted her to kill him. This was his nature, and for the first time, he understood this clearly. He didn't know why exactly. There was obviously nothing out of the ordinary happening at home, and he had no childhood trauma to contend with, like Suema Kazuko had almost encountered. But there it was, clear as day. If he searched really hard for a reason, it was a reaction against his lifestyle, a way for him to fight against his deliberate pretense of mundanity. But this was far too shallow a reason to satisfy a psychiatrist. People like Masumi, with a fetish for indirect suicide, were not particularly unusual. The naked killer looked down at him, baffled. Until now, everyone who had ever seen her had felt nothing but hatred and fear. But this boy showed no signs of either. "Why are you so quiet? You do not struggle. Do not beg," she found herself asking. "That's because I love you," Masumi answered, honestly and quite sincerely. "Huh?" For the first time in her life, the girl was dumbfounded. "You were right, Satomi-kun. Yorihara Minako's form fits my needs well. No one thinks it's strange if I don't talk to them in class. She was always like that, apparently," the manticore said, in the dimly lit coffee shop. Her face so perfectly matched Yurihara's that for all intents and purposes, she was Yurihara Minako, as the former owner of that name had long since been erased from the face of the earth. Haha, I thought so. The classes in school resemble some sort of game, but this studying for exams is utterly pointless. I just have to read the explanation and I can understand anything. You're much smarter than most of us humans, then. Even Yurihara Minako's parents haven't noticed the difference. They communicate with her so cautiously. Are all humans like that? Mostly. But be careful. There are a few egotists out there who think other people are a part of themselves. My parents, for example. Shall I kill them for you? Yurihara suggested airily. Not yet. It's still too early, Masumi replied just as evenly. True. We must be cautious until we control the world, she giggled. Exactly, Masumi grinned back. At this point, the waitress brought the lemon tea and cake that Masumi had ordered. She overheard them talking about controlling the world, but just assumed that they were talking about some sort of new video game. But she did think that the couple was far too horny, though, and that they should get a room before they started making out right there in the restaurant. They can't even be out of high school yet, but they're acting like newlyweds. They're all over each other, she thought. She was still reeling from a harsh breakup, so she slapped the bill on the table a bit roughly and left. Masumi carried on. Should we make ourselves any new slaves beyond Kusatsu Akiko? Yes. If possible, I'd like 2 or 3 more. Too many and we might get noticed, though. But at some point, we'll need them on a larger scale. Better to test the process out now. Their plan was simple. Remake human society with themselves at the center. Yurihara certainly had the power to make that a reality. She could become any human she wanted, and could make any human do her bidding. The idea was Masumi's. He offered to cooperate with her, but when she told him of her powers, he found himself rubbing his hands together with glee. We can use that, he said eagerly. When she heard his plan, it sounded quite reasonable, so she agreed. All she thought about before now was her own survival. She'd never actually thought about the rest of the world, and more importantly, she had always been alone. She'd been cloned as an experiment and had no family of her own. The only person who had ever told her, "I love you," was Satomi Masumi, who normal society would classify as a crazed lunatic. But there must be some agents from the institution pursuing me. What should we do about them? At the moment, all we can do is hope that they don't find you. Give it a little more time, and we'll be able to fight back. And demolish anyone who wishes to erase me as a failure? Exactly. You're no failure. You're going to be the new ruler of the world, Masumi said forcefully. Yurihara rested her hand on top of his. Satomi-kun, you are my prince. The man-eating monster stroked the hand of her Mephistopheles, while sweetly whispering, I love you. It may have been twisted, but they were unmistakably in love.